Welcome to a journey into the darkest corners of the human psyche. We often view science as a beacon of progress, a systematic pursuit of truth meant to cure diseases and advance civilization. But history tells a more haunting story. Sometimes the white lab coat hides a monster. Sometimes the pursuit of data becomes a mask for pure, unadulterated cruelty. Today, we are analyzing the chilling commonalities between 20 experiments that were eventually shut down, not always because they finished their work, but because they crossed a line from which humanity could not return. These stories are a mirror. They show us who we actually are when the thin veneer of civilization is stripped away. Part 1. The fragility of autonomy. We like to believe that we are the masters of our own souls. We believe in a moral compass, an internal North Star that keeps us good. But our first major theme of these experiments is that our morality is less like a compass and more like a weather vane. It points wherever the wind of authority blows. 1. The mask of medical authority. In 1966, the Hoffling Hospital experiment proved how easily we surrender our logic to a title. Imagine being a nurse. You are trained to protect lives. Yet, when a fake doctor called 22 different psychiatric wards and ordered them to administer a lethal 20-milligram dose of an unknown drug called Astratin, the results were terrifying. The bottle was clearly labeled, maximum daily dose, 10 milligrams. The order violated every safety protocol. Yet, 21 out of 22 nurses walked toward that patient's room with the syringe ready. They were only stopped at the door by researchers. It turns out the doctor title is a psychological bypass. We would rather kill a patient than have an awkward conversation with a superior. This blind obedience takes an even darker turn in the Sheridan and King study. You've likely heard of the Milgram experiment, where people shocked humans, but Sheridan and King worried participants knew the humans were faking, so they used a puppy, an actual, living, breathing puppy. As the participants increased the voltage, the puppy began to howl, yelp, and eventually jump in agony. The participants were visibly distraught. They paced, they cried, they hyperventilated, and yet 75% of them kept pulling the lever until they reached the maximum voltage. This proves a sickening truth. For most humans, the discomfort of defying authority is more painful than the guilt of torturing an innocent creature. 2. The corruption of roles. If authority doesn't break us, the roles we play will. In 1971, the Stanford prison experiment took normal college students and divided them into guards and prisoners. In less than 6 days, the guards became sadistically abusive, and the prisoners suffered genuine emotional breakdowns. The role became reality. We saw this again in the third wave. In just 5 days, a high school teacher in California turned his history class into a functioning fascist movement. By day 4, students were snitching on their friends and banning outsiders. These studies suggest that human identity is incredibly plastic. Give a human a uniform, a secret salute, and a common enemy, and they will trade their soul for a sense of belonging in less than 120 hours. Part 2. Science as a weapon of state terror. When a government decides that its citizens are no longer people but assets or obstacles, science becomes a weapon of terror. 3. Dehumanization for data. The apex of this depravity was Unit 731. During World War II, the Japanese military performed vivisections on live humans without anesthesia. They tested the bubonic plague on entire villages. They called their victims maruta, the Japanese word for logs. This wasn't just a name, it was a psychological tool to strip away humanity. But the darkest part isn't just the experiments, it's the aftermath. When the war ended, the U.S. government didn't prosecute the lead researchers. Instead, they gave them immunity in exchange for their biological warfare data. It is a chilling reminder that the world is often willing to overlook a mountain of bodies if the data is valuable enough. We see a similar betrayal in the Tuskegee syphilis study. For 40 years, the U.S. Public Health Service watched 600 black men rot from the inside out. They lied to them, telling them they were being treated for bad blood. When penicillin became the standard cure in 1947, researchers actively blocked them from receiving it. They weren't looking for a cure, they were voyeurs, documenting the slow destruction of the human nervous system. It was a multi-decade betrayal that proved knowledge is often just a mask for cruelty. 4. The arrogance of ideological erasure. Then there are the experiments that tried to fix what wasn't broken. In South Africa, the Aversion Project used chemical castration and electric shocks to try to cure homosexuality in soldiers. When that failed, they forced young men into gender reassignment surgeries, abandoning them once they were mutilated. We see the same tragic arrogance in the David Reimer case. After a botched circumcision, psychologist John Money convinced David's parents to raise him as a girl to prove that gender is a social construct. It was a disaster. David spent his life in depression, eventually transitioned back to being a man, and ultimately took his own life. These experiments are a grim warning. Biology is not a software update you can rewrite with gaslighting and surgery. Part 3. The biological nutrient of connection. Not all experiments were about pain. Some were about the absence of love. 5. The fatal silence. In the 13th century, Frederick II performed the forbidden experiment. He wanted to know what language babies would speak if they never heard a word. Would it be Hebrew? Latin? He forced nurses to feed and bathe infants but forbade them from speaking, cuddling, or even making eye contact. The result? Every single baby died. It turns out that affection is a biological nutrient. Without touch and social interaction, the human brain simply checks out. We don't just want attention. Our nervous system views being ignored as a literal death sentence. 6. The trap of utopia. But what happens when we have everything? Universe 25 was a mouse utopia with infinite food and no predators. You would think they would be happy. Instead, the society collapsed. A group emerged called the Beautiful Ones, mice who did nothing but eat, sleep, and groom themselves. They refused to mate. They lost the ability to socialize. Meanwhile, the rest of the colony descended into random violence and cannibalism. The birth rate hit 0. The population chose extinction. This suggests that the human brain is hardwired for struggle. Without a problem to solve, our consciousness factory resets into a state of narcissistic decay. Part 4. The engineering of perception. Finally, we look at how our reality is manufactured by those who control our environment. 7. Manufactured tribalism. In the Robbers Cave experiment and the blue eyes versus brown eyes exercise, we learned that prejudice is a plug-and-play instinct. By simply labeling one group as better or giving them different colored shirts, researchers turned peaceful children into hostile, flag-burning militias in a matter of hours. This proves that us versus them isn't something we learn from history books. It's a predatory instinct waiting for a scoreboard to wake up. 8. The digital and sensory void. Today, the lab has moved to the smartphone. The Facebook Emotional Contagion Study proved that your emotions aren't entirely yours. By shifting an algorithm, engineers can make hundreds of thousands of people sad just to see if they'll post more negative content. Your mood is a virus, and big tech is the carrier. And when we aren't being overstimulated, we are being broken by silence. Donald Hebb's sensory deprivation study showed that when you take away sight, sound, and touch, the brain begins to eat itself. Within 48 hours, students were hallucinating ghosts and prehistoric animals. Our consciousness is so afraid of a quiet room that it will invent a monster just to have something to talk to. Conclusion: the scar tissue of the soul. As we look back at these 20 experiments, a haunting pattern emerges. We see little Albert, a baby who was conditioned to fear anything fluffy because a man with a hammer wanted to see if he could program a phobia. We see the learned helplessness of dogs who stayed in a cage while being shocked because they had been convinced that escape was impossible. These experiments were shut down because they crossed the line from observation to victimization. They remind us of three terrifying truths. Empathy is fragile. A clipboard and a stern voice can make almost anyone a torturer. Data is dangerous. Without ethics, science is just a more efficient way to cause pain. Identity is innate. You cannot reprogram a human being without crashing the entire system. Ultimately, these stories are a warning. We are a species desperately seeking connection, easily misled by power, and fundamentally defined by the scars left by those who watched us suffer for science. We must ensure that the pursuit of the what never again destroys the who.